Silver Defender. Admitting you are wrong can be a hard thing to admit. Yeah, but it is so important. Oh, I'll tell you something in a second. Was there ever a time during the ILM days or similar where you got told, "I told you so," by a coworker when you thought you knew better? So I'll tell, I might get to an answer to that, but I want to tell you a first thing is thing two. So thing one and thing two grew up, around the corner at the house I have here in San Francisco, and we had dogs. We have dog now. Back when they were growing up, we had dogs, and when you have kids, walking the dog is part of the thing. It's part of the growing up, and we sent them to go walk the dogs all the time, and they also would they'd walk like half a block up and just hang out and then walk back and be like, "I went for a while." Or they would lie. And at one point, thing two lied about having walked the dog. Oh man. How I got him to admit it is a story, and I'll tell you that story. But so he lied about walking the dog, and Julia, my partner, she knew he was lying about it. And eventually, we got him to admit it. We got him to admit it because we put in an alarm camera system. And okay, I'm not necessarily, all right, here's what happened. We got an alarm camera system, and it got installed the day after my son claimed he had walked the dog, but he didn't know that. So what happened was he'd been arguing back and forth with Julia, like, "I walked the dog, I walked the dog." He's like, 14. I think he's 14 or 15. Yeah, no, old enough. And he's like being belligerent about it. And I walk him downstairs to the basement and I say, "We had some alarm stuff put in." And he's like, "Oh, yeah." And I point up to the camera and I go, "See the camera?" And he was like, and I said, "Do you have something to tell me?" And he said, "I didn't walk the dog." That was me playing bad cop. I got him to admit it. And I said, and I'm going to curse one more time during this live stream, but I feel like this gives you an insight into my child raising. I said to him, "I want you to learn and hold the phrase, 'I fucked up, my bad, I'm sorry.' Hold that phrase." And he goes, "Okay." And I said, "No, I want you to say it to me. I want your mouth to get used to saying it." And he repeated it to me. And I was like, "Great." And then I'm not kidding. 2 months later, he did something, came and admitted it, and said that phrase to me. I'm goosebumps, man. Being able to admit you're wrong is so important that you really should practice at it. But there's more to your question. Wait. Yes, ILM days. I had a different experience. I had an experience of, I was working on AI. I wasn't a crew lead, but I was sort of a half crew lead. Like my supervisor, Ben, had like, "Okay, you're working on this part with all the gondolas on the cables, Adam, and I'm going to give you someone to work with you on that." And the person that he gave me to work on that was much older than I was, had been around ILM for a lot longer. And this person wasn't really that interested in following exactly what I was saying. And technically I wasn't his supervisor, so he didn't have to. But there came a time when this thing went up and a tower fell over because of the way he had hung something on it. And when it fell over, he was like, "Adam told me to do it that way." Completely threw me under the bus. And my supervisor came to me and he was like, "I know this isn't your fault, but you're just going to have to eat that one." And I did. So this is one which, that guy went around saying that Adam messed this up and that's why that thing fell over. And I didn't get into the tit for tat of being like, "No, I didn't. It wasn't me." There's like no point to any of that for me within this environment. I felt like the people that know what I can do here know how I do it and what I do, and they will know the truth, and I don't have to go around sort of correcting some mistaken thing. I mean, the other thing is that at ILM, among the vast majority of us, if you were worried about how to build something, you just brought it up with someone, and they would say, "Oh, actually, Lauren Peterson was the most fun to do this with. Lauren, one of the original 7 model makers on Star Wars, you would say to Lauren, hey, look, I'm having trouble drying or heating up this tiny patch of stuff. And he'd be like, you don't know about the German heat gun? And you're like, what? And he's like, in 1978, I bought this German heat gun with a thing. Here, I'll go find it. And he'd go find this ancient bit of Star Wars history with this little thing and be like, I can heat this tiny patch to exactly 190 degrees Celsius. It was a collaborative atmosphere like that. And so you very rarely would get into a situation where you're like brute forcing your own solution without checking with someone else. Chris Pitoniak says, I love what I do at my job, but sadly there's a bit of a political flavor to the company that I don't vibe with. It got me concerned. It may color how people view me in the future. Has there ever been a time where you worked for someone or on something you didn't really see eye to eye with, but did it for the sake of your career? Yes. That's going to be the rule more than the exception. Commerce and art have always coexisted. And I know you're not talking necessarily about that you love the art of your job, but when you're talking about a vibe at work, like in general, capitalism doesn't care about the vibe at work, right? So I think of that as a sort of an artistic take on work as an enterprise. And Leonardo da Vinci was in the employ of the Medicis and others. And I'm sure being a Renaissance artist was to have great difficulties, perhaps, with some of your employer's approaches to the world. And like I said, art and commerce have always coexisted. I will tell you that way back in the early 90s, I was working in theater where I was making about $10 or $11 an hour. And that was barely enough to survive on in the early 90s. It's even worse now. And I ended up getting a job for Jamie Heineman in commercial special effects. And the first salary Jamie hired me at was $17 an hour. So my pay went from $10 to $17 overnight. And I love theater, but I never looked back because all of a sudden I could make my rent and my car could break down and I wouldn't freak out or have to borrow money because I actually had some padding in my bank account with that little extra bit of dough. And I was in the Lower Haight hanging out with some friends and some people I didn't know. And somebody in the group said, what do you do for a living? And I said, I build special effects stuff for commercials. And they were like, They literally said this to me. They were like, silly. They looked at me and they like judged me to my face as that. And I did not take it personally. My first thought was, you find me a job where I can afford my life and to make the art that I make with every spare minute of my time I'm not at work. I am building stuff for Coca-Cola and Dow Corning and all these giant Fortune 100 companies and their commercials. I'm helping them sell and ply their trades in the world. There's all sorts of deep moral compromise going on there. And art and commerce have always coexisted. It's part and I'm not saying that any of this is inevitable. There are other systems and there are other ways of doing it, but this is the one we have, and this is how it has developed. And so I have found my peace with executing what I execute and how I do it and the people that I do it for. And much of the latter half of my life and career have been around building systems so that I have control over those choices that I make. But that doesn't mean that I still get to make exactly all the choices that I want to make. I still have to make compromises. It's just the natural course of things. And I try and make those compromises on a balance that I feel that, the job that I'm doing, what it brings me or what I'm able to do with it is a net betterment of the world and of my career and of my finances and of the things that I'm doing. There are companies that I would not work for, but unless they, even no matter how much money they could bring. And there were companies that backed up truckloads of money for Jamie and I, and turning those companies down for the specific things they were asking us to do. One of the great things that I have ever gotten to do. Honestly, I said a few weeks ago that some of the most important jobs in your career will be the jobs that you don't take. And I mean that in this global sense, like having, big three automakers come to Jamie and I to bust a myth about some new car. And we're like, man, the moment we do that, no one ever takes us seriously again. And like, it's a lot of money, life-changing money. But again, for how long? And it's not like FU money at all. And I'm sitting there with Jamie and neither of us feel good about this. And we're like, no, let's send it away. So I'm giving you a non-answer. I don't have an answer to your specific situation. I've just given you some examples of how I've approached those things. And the reality is that you're always going to have compromised bedfellows working within a system like this. And the goal is to find for yourself the right amount of freedom, the right amount of compromise to where you don't feel like you are selling your soul. We're all selling our soul to some degree. It's so funny, like in the 70s and 80s, there was this whole idea about selling out. I don't want to be a sellout. And you can read all sorts of different analyses of what that word meant over time. It was like you became too popular when REM's album went bananas and everyone was like, I liked them back in the day. They're sellouts now because they're so popular. And then comes the 90s and the dot-com boom, and selling out is actually the goal. The goal is build a company with your friends and then sell it for $1 gazillion and keep all that money. Like that. The reality of like what works for each one of us lies in each one of us. For some people, that is the right call to make. And for others, it's absolutely the wrong one. I have, in my life, come to understand that I don't want to do this alone. That is why why Tested exists, because I love having a team to bounce these things off of. They give me, everybody on this team has their own perspective, and we compare our perspectives and come to what we think of as the best path forward. It is invigorating to have other people pulling on that same rope in the same way that it was with Jamie. So you may find solace in talking to a coworker in the same situation as you at the same company about how to deal with that. Yeah, man. Life is messy. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I wanted to briefly mention that you could become a Tested member. I know, everybody is competing for you to become a member of their thing. What I want to express to you is that the Tested membership has become such an important part of the Tested family. We get tremendous feedback from the Tested members, and they expand the stories that we can tell and the things that we have access to. And you can become a part of it right now by clicking on the link below. See you in the chat.